The FedLife podcast is presented by Serving Those Who Serve, a fiduciary, fee-based financial planning firm serving federal government employees and retirees all over the country. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as financial advice. All listeners should consult their personal advisors before taking any action. The opinions expressed by our hosts are their own and do not reflect the views, policies, or position of Raymond James. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Serving Those Who Serve is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services, Inc. And now, here are your hosts. Dan Sipe serves as a branch manager for Raymond James Financial Services and Serving Those Who Serve. Ed Zerndorfer is our guest and federal benefits expert in the space.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the FedLife podcast. I'm your host, Dan Sipe. Additionally, I'm the branch manager here at Serving Those Who Serve and Lee Sipe and Associates. I'm going to begin, as I always do, by saying thank you. Number one, thank you for taking the time to view or listen. But above all, thank you for your service to the government, to country, to me, to everyone. You don't hear it enough. You're always going to hear it here. The other thing, if you're a regular, you're always going to hear my buddy, Ed Zerndorfer. He's back here once again. The guru is here as part of our ongoing mission to reach, teach, and serve you, the career civilian Fed. In these videos, we amplify and follow Ed's Fed Zone articles. So at the outset, I'm going to encourage you to head over to the Fed Zone. That's fed-zone.com. You can also get there through the SWServe website and take a look at Ed's articles. So many times he has just additional support materials, great charts, things like that to help you get your hands around these things and understand them. It's just one more way for us to reach and teach. So Ed, it's 2025. Happy New Year. We have a new year and a new administration. And so I'm sure you've noticed, I've certainly noticed, that we have a few more people inquiring about their retirement eligibility than we necessarily have. And in your latest article, you address, in a way, what we've seen in that uptick of questions by highlighting a very important step, because we want our feds to get credit for all of their eligible time. And you have a fantastic article that talks about non-deduction time. And I know that is not something that's rolling off the lips of our feds out there. So tell us, what is non-deduction time?
Okay, Dan, first of all, thank you. Happy New Year to you. Let me just say this. We're getting a lot of questions from federal employees now with the new administration, new Congress coming in this month. And there's a lot of talk about federal employees being furloughed, fired, maybe forced to retire if they're eligible to retire. So there are a lot of federal employees
relocated, relocated,
things like that. Thank you for pointing that out, that many employees are really thinking seriously about retiring. They wanted to, before all this happens, they feel that they don't retire now, it make it almost impossible to retire down the line for whatever one reason or another. So let me just say at the outset, if they want to retire, whether they're under the CSRS or FERS, they must fulfill two requirements. Number one, they have to have a minimum number of years of service, and they have to be at a minimum age. And we discussed this during our monthly webinars. We have a monthly webinar on FERS every month, and CSRS every 3 months. But here's the point. The easy requirement is age. You know when you were born. You know what that minimum age is. But the tough thing is minimum years of service. What are minimum years of service? Minimum years of service means that you were employed and you were contributing to a retirement system, whether it's CSRS or FERS. What do I mean contributing? A part of your paycheck every 2 weeks was being deducted and contributed to, if you're a CSRS, a service office employee, to the CSRS Retirement Disability Fund. And if you are a FERS employee, every 2 weeks, a portion of your paycheck was being deducted and contributed to the FERS Retirement Disability Fund. So by contributing, you're getting credit for those 2 weeks of service towards that eligibility requirement, that minimum number of years of service eligibility requirement. Now, we also point out that there are many federal employees who previously being hired, before they were hired as a permanent employee, were working as a temporary employee. More specifically, when they were working as a temporary employee, they were not contributing to any retirement system, whether CSRS or FERS or there are other retirements of the federal pensions, the foreign pension system or Federal Reserve Bank. There are a bunch of retirement systems out there that cover federal employees, but they were not contributing to any retirement system. When they got hired and they're initially hired, hopefully something was said to them about, we noticed that you have some prior federal service as a temporary employee in which you were not contributing to any retirement system. This is what I mean by non-deduction service. What do I mean non-deduction? Nothing was coming out of their paycheck to contribute to any retirement system. The reason I say when they were initially hired, hopefully someone was mentioned to it, because they can make what's called a deposit for that time in which they were contributing to a retirement system, and therefore get credit for that time for eligibility purposes. Unfortunately, many employees were not told about that. They weren't told about making that deposit, because had they made that deposit right away, they would owe no interest.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean it's too late to make a deposit? Absolutely not. They still can make that deposit. And in so doing, they will get credit for the months, the years that they were working as a temporary employee. Therefore, by making that deposit in full, it'll make them one step closer to being eligible to retire, given that they've reached that minimum age.
Gotcha. And so let's say their feds say, oh yeah, wait a minute. I had that internship time. I had that time. So how can they make sure, I'm sure there's rules they have to follow and to make that deposit, correct?
That is correct. And we're going to go through those in a few moments. But just to stimulate people who are listening, maybe you can listen, whether you're listening, you're listening live or you're going to listen later on, there are certain types of non-deduction service for which one can make a deposit. There's some types of service you cannot make a deposit. So I think it's worthwhile going through the list of service.
Good point. Yep.
There's really there are six. There are four types of non-deduction service for which a employee can make a deposit, and I like to go through this list here.
Yeah, let's do that. I think it's a good idea.
Okay, so the list includes any period of creditable civilian service, like you work for a federal agency, okay, or the Postal Service for that matter. Postal Service has its own separate retirement, and that creditable service occurred before January the 1st, 1989. If you had some type of non-deduction service, for example, you worked a couple summers as an intern, maybe you worked in one of the national parks over the summer when you were a high school student, maybe a college student, you were in the Peace Corps, or in voluntaries, or VISTA, voluntaries in service to America. Those are all examples of non-deduction service. As a temporary employee, non-deduction service, you got paid. And this is how you know you had non-deduction service. You're being paid for your service. And what was coming out of your paycheck, Dan? Federal income taxes, state income taxes, Social Security tax, Medicare Part A, hospital insurance tax. You had no benefits as a temporary employee non-deduction service. The only benefit you had was you accrued leave, annual leave, and sick leave. That's the only benefit you had. You didn't have any insurance benefits, and you couldn't contribute to the TSP. And most importantly, nothing was coming out of your paycheck to contribute to any retirement system. All right. I want to go the second item, the second type of civilian service that for which an employee can make a deposit. And this goes back a while. Any period of civilian service during which CSRS deductions. Here we have a CSRS employee, Dan. This is before January 1st, 1984. We have a CSRS employee a permanent employee who every 2 weeks, 7% of their paycheck was coming out every 2 weeks from their paycheck, contributing to the CSRS Retirement Disability Fund. But then after a certain number of years, that employee left federal service. And what did they ask for? A refund of all those CSRS contributions. Well, guess what? That employee who may have come back to federal service later on as a FERS employee can make a deposit for those years they were working as a CSRS employee.
Sure.
Number 3, certain periods of civilian service preferred under another retirement system for federal employees, such as maybe an employee worked at the Federal Reserve Bank. They have their own retirement system, Dan. This is not CSRS or FERS. The Federal Reserve Bank has its own retirement system. But that employee left the Federal Reserve Bank and now became employed under FERS. They can make a deposit for the time they were working for the Federal Reserve Bank. And finally, I mentioned about the Peace Corps and Voluntary Service to America. That is considered to be temporary time non-deduction service. If you recall, my first point was that if you had any non-deduction service before, it had to be before January 1st, 1989 in order to make a deposit. But the exception is Peace Corps and Vista. You could have had a service in the Peace Corps or Vista at any time. It didn't just have to be before January 1st, 1989. It could have been any, and after that, you can make a deposit for that. So those are the 4 types of non-deduction service for which a FERS deposit can be made. There are 3 types. There are 3 types you cannot make a deposit. 3.
Yep.
And they are, again, like I said, if it was other than Peace Corps or Voluntary Service to America Vista, if a FERS employee had any temporary non-deduction service after December 31st, 1988, they cannot make a deposit for that service. They will get credit for leave purposes, though, but not for retirement purposes. So that
Gotcha.
Number 2, any federal service which is not creditable under FERS. And here's an example. And we get this question all the time, Dan. I worked as a non-appropriated fund employee, NAF, NAF. Can I make a deposit for that? The answer is no, you cannot. NAF employees, if you work under NAF, you cannot make a deposit. You're not getting any credit for NAF, for your time at NAF for FERS purposes, nor can you make a deposit. And number 3, if you left federal service under any retirement system and you got a lump sum payment for unused annual leave, you cannot make a deposit for the amount of the unused annual leave.
Gotcha.
Those are the 3 types you cannot make a deposit.
Okay, good. So if we have one of the 4, how do we determine the deposit? What's the formula look like there?
Okay, so the formula for deposit is 1.3% of whatever the employee's total basic pay was. This is the basic pay. Whatever they earned as a FERS employee. For example, as a temporary non-deduction service employee. Do an example. Suppose they worked a couple summers and they earned each summer $1,000. Their total basic pay was $2,000. So what do they owe for their FERS deposit? 1.3% of $2,000 is $26. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, Dan.
Nope.
But that's before interest.
And that's the kicker.
That's the kicker. Now, this is what I was saying earlier. Hopefully, when they were hired as a permanent employee, when they came into FERS, they were told about this. Because had they made there's an example here, this employee owed $26 for his or her deposit. Had they paid they had 3 years, Dan, 3 years from their hire date to pay $26. They wouldn't owe 1 penny of interest. I think $26 is very affordable. Would you say that?
I would absolutely say that. Yep.
That over 3 years, that's what, $8 a year? It's a little over $8 a year.
Yeah, I think we can swing that.
Okay. But unfortunately, many employees were not told about this. And when did they find out about it? Taking one of our webinars.
Absolutely.
Taking one of their webinars. So then the question comes up, can they still make a deposit? And the answer is absolutely yes, but then they're going to owe interest. Interest. And there's and the interest varies by year. We're going back all the way to 1987 when FERS got started. It's a variable. It depends on it's a variable rate that it varies by year. And the interest starts as of the 2-year anniversary, the anniversary date when the employee was hired. The first 2 years that there's no interest charge, but it starts as of 2 years. But let's think about this. If we find out there's an employee who hey, I had this employee. I had those 2 summers I worked, and that was in 1982, 83, and I was hired in 1990. So my interest goes back to 1992, $26. That's what you owe. Interest couldn't be more than a couple $100 at this point. Couple $100. So they how do they go about making that to making that deposit? They want to make it. They have to download a form. I'll mention that form is. It's standard form SF 3108. SF standard form 3108, application to make a deposit. Okay? They download it from www.opm.gov/forms. It's a standard form, SF. Download it, fill out as much as they can, take it to their HR office or personnel office, and then the HR will fill out the rest and send it off to OPM. OPM will then figure out how much the person owes in terms of their deposit. Contact personnel. Personnel will notify the employee what the total amount of their deposit is for their temporary service, and then they can make the payments in installments. They don't have to pay it in a lump sum. But keep in mind that if they do it in installments, the unpaid balance will still accrue interest each year. So they're advised. Gotcha. And we're not talking a lot of money here. They're really advised to pay it off in a lump sum payment if possible. And I get this question, Ed, I don't have the money to make that type of payment. You're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, which it's possible. Maybe over a 10-year period. If they were temporary for a 10-year period, it could be thousands of dollars. And one of the questions I get many times during webinars, and I did when I was doing seminars, if I can't afford to pay it in lump sum, do you have any suggestions? And one of my suggestions, it's hard for me to say this, take out a loan from the TSP. I'm not a big fan of TSP loans.
I know that.
But if it means taking a loan from the TSP, which means you are borrowing from one retirement system in order to increase your other portion of your retirement. That's your FERS. Then It's okay. Also, when you have a TSP loan, you are paying interest, but to who? You. You're paying it to yourself, not to OPM. So, but if possible, it's a good idea to make that FERS deposit in one swoop.
Gotcha. And folks, Ed's article has some great examples in it. So again, be sure to head over the FedZone, fed-zone.com, to check that out. Also, you can go through the SWS website, swserve.com. Now, Ed, you also point out that they're not required to do a deposit, and there's really no penalty if they choose not to, correct?
That is correct. There's a difference here. They are not required to make the deposits, and their annuity will not be reduced as a result of not making the deposit, which, by the way, is not the case under the old system. The old system, it's altogether different. If you are CSRS, we talk about this during our CSRS webinars, which we do not hold every month. If you are a FERS or FERS officer employee, you know nothing about deposits, or for that matter, redeposits, please attend one of our webinars.
Absolutely.
Go to the website there. Depending when you hear this, we have CSRS webinars in January, April, July, and October. They're presented every month. But getting back to the FERS deposit, making a FERS deposit can only help you, but not making it is not going to hurt you. There's a big difference here. And if, with your permission, Dan, I'd like to run through one of my examples just to make my point here.
Go for it.
Okay. So I actually have two examples here in the column. Let's just go through example number one. Elizabeth is a FERS employee. She's 60 years old. She entered federal service in 2008. As of January 1st, 2025, Elizabeth has 16 years of federal service under FERS. Now remember, she's age 60.
Gotcha.
Elizabeth would love to retire now. She would love to retire, but she can't. Why? She has the age. She's 60 years old, but in order to retire at age 60 under what's called immediate retirement, she has to have 20 years of service.
Gotcha.
Okay. Note that between 1985 and 1989, Elizabeth served in the Peace Corps. Okay. When she entered federal service in 2008, unfortunately, Elizabeth was not told of her eligibility to make a deposit for her 4 years of Peace Corps service. She wasn't told. When she contacted her personal office that she wanted to make a full deposit, her personal office said that she filled out the forms at 3108, SF 3108. Personnel sent it off to OPM, and OPM told the personal office, Elizabeth owes a deposit of $3,945.
Okay.
Which includes interest. Okay. Now, let's understand that if Elizabeth goes ahead and makes that full deposit of $3,945, the following is going to happen. Once she completes that deposit, 4 years, that 4 years of Peace Corps will be added to her existing service time. So that's 16 years that she has, plus 4 years, is 20 years of service now. And Elizabeth can retire immediately. The minute she gets confirmation that OPM has gotten that full amount of $3,945, she makes a lump sum payment. Her SCD for retirement is going to be pushed back 4 years. She has 4 more years. She has 20 years of service. And this is the biggie, Elizabeth's starting FERS gross annuity. The way the annuity is calculated, Dan, is you take your years of service times your high 3 average salary.
Yep.
Times what's called an accrual factor. Now, since Elizabeth wants to retire at age 60, the accrual factor is going to be 1%. Okay. So by adding those 4 years of service, she's going to add 4% to her annuity every year for the rest of her life. Let's do some number crunching here. I love numbers. Okay. So let's say her high 3 average salary is $110,000. That's her high 3 average salary. So she's adding 4% to her annuity. So what's 4% of $110,000? $4,400 a year. $4,400 a year. She's going to get an extra $4,400 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And starting when she's 62, that's going to be adjusted by a COLA. Let's take 3 steps back and analyze this. What just happened here? Here, Elizabeth paid $3,945. And as a result of this, Dan, Elizabeth's going to get $4,400 a year with cost of living adjustments for the rest of her life. Dan, I know you have more experience in this than I have. I know you work in investment.
Indeed.
Can you please tell me where somebody could invest $3,945 and get a guarantee? This is a guaranteed return of $4,400 a year. Can you find a place like that?
Outside of the example that you've given and others like it within the federal system, those are the only ones I've ever seen.
Okay, I'll put it to you one other way here. Okay, how long will it take Elizabeth to get her money back? That's what I also like to do. So I did a calculation. What I did was I took $3,945, divided by 4,400, and I multiply that times 12 months because you get annuities are paid it. It comes out to be 10.76 months.
Less than a year.
What that means is that right after Elizabeth retires, she's going to get her money back to $3,945 in less than 11 months. How could you go wrong here?
Yep. And I will quote you from some of our past interactions where you say, that's not a good deal. That's the best deal.
That's the best. That's the best. I'd just like to go look through one more example here because this is going to, for a lot of people, for people who are older, like they're in the mid-60s, this really may hit home. I have Frank. He's 65. He was in the government. He actually was in the federal service between 1980 and 1983. He worked 3 years under CSRS and then left and took a refund of his CSRS contributions. Remember I mentioned earlier that if you were under CSRS and then you left the government and asked for a refund of your CSRS contributions, you could make a deposit for those years that you worked under CSRS. Actually, he left in 1984, but then he came back to federal service in 2021. He came back in 2021 at the age of, he was actually 61, and now he's worked ever since. So he has right now, Dan, he's 65. He has 3 years of federal service. He never heard about making this deposit. So he found out and he wants to make a full deposit for his 3 years of withdrawn CSRS service. If he does, he'll then have, once he completes that deposit for those 3 years of CSRS service, he'll now have a total of 6 years of FERS service, and Frank can retire immediately, right away. He doesn't have to work an additional 3 more years under FERS because he got those 3 years back by making that deposit. And Frank's going to be one happy cat because poor Frank is 65 years old. He's tired. He doesn't want to work anymore. He would like to retire. Now he can.
Absolutely. And that's always great news to bring to somebody. You don't have to go longer and you can get more. And Ed, that is what makes the work you do so special. So on behalf of all our feds, I'll say it again. Thank you for being such a great resource and going to this level of detail.
My pleasure. I just want to say one thing that there's going to be 2 more columns coming out in the near future. Our readers should be aware in the Fed Zone. One will be on military deposits. Saying the same idea here in terms of, adding to your federal service by making a full military service. And then there's going to be a column that I have never seen written up anywhere. Any Fed publication, I've never seen any of this. A redeposit. That'll be coming out also in the very near future. Redeposits. Same idea. By making a full redeposit, You get credit for retirement eligibility and for computation. It is a win-win-win situation. Deposits and redeposits. It'll allow you to retire earlier than expected with enhanced annuity. Please, those employees who are affected by this, take full advantage of it. We're here to help. If you got questions, please, again, number one, attend our webinars. We go through this, but these columns will really bring out what you need to do and encourage you to do so.
Absolutely. And folks, I'll second what Ed says. Follow those articles at the Fed Zone. We will amplify those in our next podcasts. So we'll have two ways to leverage that into this. But we're going to make sure that we're writing the stuff that gives you the information you need to make the best decisions for yourself and your families to get the most out of the benefits that you've earned. And again, thank you so much for being such a great resource. Folks, that is a wrap. We are Serving Those Who Serve, so be sure to subscribe to this podcast on our YouTube channel and or Spotify. And please, 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 no joke, I want you to think of somebody right now that you can share this with, because we're seeing it grow and the footprint's growing. There are a lot of people that are going to need and want help this year more than any other time, perhaps. So we're all in this together. We are in this with you. Share this. So people know the resources there. We're seeing the traffic flows increasing, and we're going to keep producing the content that you need to make the best decisions. And don't forget those live webinars pretty much every single week. Go to the SWS website, that's stwserve.com. You'll see the blue webinar button, hover it. It turns red. Click on it, gives you the whole menu. You will see all the places where the guru, Ed, will come to you and teach you where you are, reach you where you are, and above all, serve you where you are. Sign up for one, sign up for all, share it with friends. They will thank you. Do not miss Ed every single week in the Fed Zone. I've talked about it a million times. I'm going to remind you again. That's fed-zone.com. So don't miss those. So in closing, for Ed, the crew at Serving Those Who Serve, and me, Dan Sipe, I'm going to close out, as I always do, by saying, good luck, Godspeed, and above all, it's your Fed life. Make it a great one because you deserve it. Stay well, everybody. We are out.